Okay, so we'll just start in 10 seconds.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to this webinar on Business Process Architecture with Roger Burlton. This is Shane McGlynn of IRM UK. Greetings from London. Roger Burlton is a BPM pioneer, author, and chair of our annual BPM conference, which this year takes place in London from the 11th to the 14th of June. We welcome your questions via the questions panel, and Roger can answer these at the end of his talk. And now I'll hand you over to Roger in Canada.
Thank you, Shane. It's my pleasure to be with everybody this morning. For you this afternoon, that is, of course. It's my pleasure. I'm going to talk about the idea of business process architecture. There's a lot of discussion these days about architecture, from enterprise architecture to business architecture and so on. What I'm going to talk about is how business processes actually help link and connect all the components of an architecture and allow us to go all the way from the very strategic issues all the way down to the implementation of solutions within an organization. So it'll be my pleasure to sort of take you through some of that and some of the concepts. I look forward to any questions that anybody has, and we'll leave plenty of time for those questions towards the end of the event this morning. So first of all, let me just talk about the concept of how all this basically starts together. The organization that I spend most of my time with is an organization called BPTrends. BPTrends has a methodological approach for taking the strategy all the way through. And the way we tend to look at it is in three major slices. And there's the slice of looking at the whole enterprise, which is the architectural point of view. There's the slice of looking at a particular process by process where we make improvements. And there's the slice that says, well, at some point in time, we actually have to implement all of our great business process ideas and all of the capabilities required to support and implement those ideas, both on the human resources side as well as the IT side. So we're going to start with the top of the stack, where it talks about strategy, performance measurement, and management, and the idea that we need to align all of our business processes and all of our capabilities to a prioritization approach, which makes sure that strategy does see the light of day. The work we're doing at the next level, of course, is with the business processes, where you tend to see things such as business process improvement. You tend to see things like Six Sigma and Lean showing up. And then down at the bottom, we tend to see a lot of technologies such as business process management systems and ERPs, as well as fundamental cultural change, organizational change, and the human competency change that has to be there. So this is sort of the thinking model that's going to sit behind the things I'm going to talk about today. The methodology to support all of this is fairly simple and fairly commonsensical, I would say. If we look at the top line of all of this particular chart, we will see that there is always corporate strategy coming all the way through, and the architect's role, in our opinion, is not to create that strategy, but to really intimately understand that strategy. And the first box of that says understand the enterprise context. And the context meaning what are your external pressures and who are your stakeholders, and therefore can we represent that in such a way that we can build a good process architecture to make sure that the work we do, which is really our definition of process, the work we do, is actually in complete alignment with where we're trying to take the organization. In addition to that, on the third box of the top line, we say define the performance measures. That's to make sure our measurement system and our evaluation system is in line with the outcomes and the results of what we're trying to do in our processes, and of course, connecting up to our strategy one more time. One of the things that is actually a little bit different about the approach we're talking about, especially with regard to a process-centric approach, is that there does have to be some governance that basically says, are we actually managing the performance data and actually the actual performance of the organization? And in addition to that, are we able to make the right changes happen and invest in the right places, having the right portfolio. And also making sure that all of the capabilities required, a complete set, which I'll talk about a bit towards the end of the presentation, all of those are in sync with the outcomes you're trying to deliver. So it's basically a traceability concept. On the far right-hand side, it's are we managing and monitoring those business processes on a day-to-day basis? Because if we're not, there's going to be a gap, and that gap will come up with prioritized projects for process by process that we actually have to improve by understanding what we're trying to do at the next level down, process level, making sure we analyze the existing situation, redesigning it, and then making sure we can get it coordinated, the implementation that is, and we roll out the solutions. Now, the bottom level, it would be very, very generic because it's very different if you're implementing an SAP or ERP type solution than if you're building a website or if you're actually bringing a new product to market. So those approaches are generically shown as gather requirements, design the solution, develop it, and test it. So overall on the right-hand side, we can then execute the process and keep the resources there. So this is in a nutshell the method that I'm going to take you through. I'm going to take you through some of the key aspects of it. Clearly, it's very hard to do all of this in one short webinar, but at the event, you will see this developed all the way through workshops and particular sessions that we will talk through, and also others at the event will talk through. So first of all, let me start with the idea of understanding the enterprise context and a couple of key aspects of that. One of the things we believe in very, very strongly, and our experience has proven it quite well, is that if you start by looking outside the organization and before you come inside, you'll always be connected to value creation. One of the things that people talk about with regard to process, they say input, process, output, but what we're really saying is it really starts before that. It starts with an external need where the inputs come from, and it ends up with an external result, which is why people came into us in the first place. So this is our little local pizza restaurant, which is fairly trivial, but it hopefully gets the point across that there's a relationship between our customers and ourselves. There's a relationship between our owners and ourselves, and our suppliers, and so on. And of course, as governance bodies, many of us are getting more and more governance than we ever hoped for these days, especially if you're in the financial services business. And so all of these relationships, as well as the relationships with our community, have to be successful relationships. So what we always do is start with what are the needs and what are the expectations of each of the relationships before we start looking inside the box. So that's the rule, outside before inside. Once we understand the outside, then we can determine what we need to do, what we should do on the inside. So I will apologize right now that a lot of this will just be pure common sense, but hopefully we can turn common sense into common practice and make this work. So what questions will we ask? We would ask the questions for each stakeholder relationship by getting into our DeLorean Back to the Future time machine and seeing what we want the future to be and what our partners want the relationship to be. We would say, what do we give people? What do we get from people? Products, services, information are exchanged with external stakeholders. We would also ask the question, what are their needs and expectations, and how can we turn those into goals for ourselves so that we don't just make it up internally, we actually have a sound basis for delivering on what is expected. We'd also ask the question, how do we actually manage that relationship? Do we measure customer satisfaction? Do we measure lost customers? Do we measure the lifetime value of all the revenue we could generate from them, and so on? There's a lot of different things we could measure. Finding the measures is hard, but it's critical because it's the beginning of our scorecard, which goes all the way into the work we do every single day. And what about the objectives? What are the target levels for those key performance indicators? Do we want to improve by 3% or 50%? Makes a big difference with regard to our change program. And ultimately, in order to do all that, what capabilities do we have to have in place? Well, what are the critical factors that have to be satisfied? And with all of this information, it makes it so much easier to determine what work we should be doing internally and how to architect our organization to be a successful organization. So we start with understanding the why, the who cares and the why of the organization. One of the simple things we would do is do this little context diagram or a stakeholder diagram that says things such as our delivery customer will send us order details, we'll give them a pizza, and we'll receive money. At this level, it's pretty high level, but going around each of these, we start to see that on the other end of every one of these arrows coming in, there's a business process. On the front end of every arrow going out, there's a business process. So we can actually derive our business processes based upon our stakeholders and our interactions, because that way they're end to end. They're not based upon the department or the org chart. They're based upon the value that is actually created. If we do that, and we know the needs and expectations from before, we can actually do an assessment. We can do a red, amber, green assessment, traffic light type of assessment on how well is each one of those working. So for example, when we have a delivered pizza going to a delivery customer, if that's been assessed as not healthy, not good by our customers, then we can say sitting inside this restaurant is a business process which is not working. In this case, we're receiving green things in and sending red things out. Well, there's something in between which is not right. So therefore, it starts to tell us where our pain points are and where our opportunities are for improvement. So this is always a very interesting exercise to do because it visually shows the people on the business side of the house that we really start to understand where are the big opportunities and where are the threats that we don't handle those opportunities in the right way. So it's a good starting tool. We're going to see this red, amber, green show up again farther down the stack. One of the things we found to be extremely helpful is something we call our North Star. So if anybody here is in the Southern Hemisphere, I apologize, you don't have a North Star, but you can substitute Southern Cross if you like. Anyways, what we would do is we look at each of those stakeholders and we look at all of their needs and we try to find a balance to say, how can we sort of optimize the set of target points that we're always going to aim for? So our North Star becomes our navigational point to basically say everything we do, we should be asking, how well does it support this anywhere from 4 to 7 types of statements? And so in this particular case, we've said here that the pizza restaurant, it has to increase revenue profitably with positive cash flow. But in addition to that, we have another one called decrease our environmental impact. Well, but notice we've said that increased revenue, that's 30% of the 100% available to us in terms of consideration or value for overall. Whereas decrease our environmental impact is only 5%. Well, the reason in this particular illustration that one is 30 and one is 5 is this organization doesn't have great cash flow, and if it doesn't have good cash flow, then it will not be able to afford to decrease the environmental impact. So we have to sort of balance these things, and this is always a very difficult discussion with the top executives of the organization. But I can guarantee you, when you put a draft of this on the slide deck in front of them and watch the discussion happen, it's intriguing to happen, and it always works out particularly well, even though at the beginning the individual executives do not necessarily agree. But if we take it from the point of view of the stakeholders looking in, it's a much easier discussion to have. So in this case, sustain our food, sustain our licenses, increase our reliability. And one of the hallmarks of this type of approach is to look for a vector. Don't just put down the number. Basically say we have to increase something, we have to decrease something, or we have to sustain something. Those are the 3 verbs you can use to sort of help position the direction you want each one of these things to grow. And the weighting factors you're going to see a little bit later are going to be used for prioritization. When we look at each process, we're going to say how much does each process contribute to cash flow versus environmental impact, and we'll count it according to the weighting factor that's there. This is going to avoid personal preferences later on and executives fighting over their personal choices, and make it much more associated with the business result we're trying to deliver. That gives us a direction. Now what do we want? We actually want to align our business processes. And this is a notation that we use called an IGO, which stands for input, things coming in from the left, materials, information, and state changes from the outside world coming in. And input, guide, which stands for all the things which guide, govern, control us, methods, rules, reference information, which is not transformed, but lookup data, which also comes in from the outside world, which is, in this case, another process or an external stakeholder. Outputs, so IGO, O now is output, which is also physical materials, information, or sometimes even a state change, like a dissatisfied customer to a satisfied one, which also goes back outside to another business process in the architecture or an external stakeholder. And E stands for enablers, which is technologies, facilities, and people. Quite often people might refer to these as the capabilities of the organization in order for all this to happen. And in our experience, you find the classic SIPOC, supplier, input, process, output, customer. We've added guides and enablers because we've discovered that the vast majority of problems in the work that we do, in the processes we perform, are not so much on the inputs and the outputs, or even in the processes. Quite often they're in rules which don't make any sense, or enablers which are not capable of doing the work. So we're going to use this at multiple levels, working all the way through. So basically then, an organization's business processes describe the work performed by all resources and creating outcomes of value for customers and other stakeholders. A very simple definition of a process, which we'll get back to this point here. So one of the things we've applied here is something called the Business Process Manifesto, which is now available in 8 languages on the BPTrends.com site. And it's been worked on by hundreds of people around the world over 3 years, and I was happy to be the editor and the prime driver behind this, where basically we talk about what our business process is all about anyway. And I'm not going to go into the details here. You can download that. It's a free download. And also everybody will receive, anybody coming to the conference will receive a nicely printed version of this document. So first of all, business processes are about describing the work. They're about creating value for people who care. They're also about how do we use our resources. And they're also within a well-defined business context, because you can have a business process inside the HR department, or you can have a business process across the whole company. It's always about motivation. There's always goals and objectives that have to be met by that process. It's also about naming. We like to have consistent naming conventions, but it has to be consistent. It has to be very focused on business terminology, not just terminology from an IT department or a different group. We also deal with the issue of models, whereby different audiences can see the business process depicted in a way that is relevant for them. In other words, personally, I would not show a detailed BPMN 2.0, I mean really detailed. I would not show that to the president of my company. I would show something much simpler. And each group has its own requirements for communication. And the business process is unique. It's not something else. It's not part of something else. It's its own asset that has to be managed. And each one of these is described in detail in the manifesto. So we talked about external stakeholders. But also now we're going inside to look at our business processes. Now in this particular diagram, what we're looking at is actually an organization chart. And so many times, I mean, we've all had this experience where we as customers come into an organization and provide a request and expect a result, which is, in the top right corner, you see the line coming in, the line going out. Whereas in reality, what's happening is it's going all over the organization, and sometimes it's being bounced on the outside. Our challenge is, are our business processes working well, and are we managing the dots, and we're managing the connections among the dots in order to get this done, or is it the customer who's basically managing the connections across the dots? So many times we get bounced from person to person to person to person, or system to system to system. And what we find is that the only person making the process work is the outside person. So what we're actually saying here is that our business processes exist regardless of your org chart. Your external stakeholders couldn't care less about your organization chart. They don't want to know about it. They shouldn't have to know about it. And they shouldn't be the ones making it work. It's up to us to make those processes work. Even if we organize 5,000 different ways, our business processes are still there whether we like them or not, because we've defined them coming from the outside and creating value back to the outside. So one of the things we'll do is we'll say, well, gee, let's look at each of those relationships. Right now I've got a pizza delivery customer. Well, what do we do with them? We make them aware of our services. We promote a pizza service to them. We fulfill their orders. We enhance the relationship. And at some point, we'll terminate the relationship. I mean, it will end at some point in time. Every relationship has a cycle. And one of the tools and the techniques we will use that's very, very successful, very simple for people to understand, is to take each stakeholder one at a time and say, where does the relationship start, and what are all the things we do logically in order, and where does it end? And that gives us a tremendous inventory to start to build out our process architecture. And for some of you, you might call it a capability map, but we believe that any capability map should actually be business process centric, and therefore it's always connected to the value created for the people who care about what we're doing. We will derive, in this case, a very simple architecture of what do we do. From the core, we advertise, we purchase supplies, and all the way through to delivering services and providing ongoing services, including delivering pizza orders or serving in the restaurant. We have enabling processes, provide IT, assign human resources, and we have guiding processes where we plan the business, develop strategy, plan operations. These are all the processes which allow us to actually operate the core properly, and all the enabling ones provide the resources to operate the core properly. So this business process architecture is actually a very useful tool to now organize everything. So that to be measured, starting with our North Star that we had before, so increase revenue profitably with some targets, 9 out of 10 on customer satisfaction, grow the business by 50%. Now when we pick a process, we can actually say this process will contribute to that overall strategic intent. So what we're doing is we're building traceability down to the business processes from the overall set of statements that executives want to have. And this also will allow us to prioritize the work that we actually need to do. That prioritization will be because it's most important to meeting our strategic intent, and because its current performance is far from where we'd like it to be. So we can build our portfolio at the process architecture level and build our investment change budgets based upon how well each of the processes deliver value to the overall strategic intent. Now, how are we going to measure some of this? Measurement is important. We can measure, are we effective? Do we do the right things? Are we providing value? Do customers like what we're doing? Will they recommend Net Promoter Score? Will they recommend to their friends? We can measure quality. Are we consistent? Do we meet our standards? What happens when we make a mistake, a defect? And what does it cost us to fix it? We can measure how flexible are we? How fast can we get to marketplace? How easily can we make a change? We can also measure efficiency, which is how long does it take? How much does it cost? How well do we use our resources? And we believe this is sort of a new form of a balanced scorecard, these 4 items. It's a balanced scorecard which is a process-centric balanced scorecard, which is always connected to outcomes, always connected to results, always connected to the outside world that we're trying to satisfy. So we can put these measures at the North Star level. We put them all the way down to the individual piece of work, going down to the bottom of the stack of the hierarchy. Now, out of all of this, we will, as I said before, we will have discovered which processes are working well and which ones are not working well, which ones are strategic and which ones are not. And the combination of what we call high pain and high gain will allow us to prioritize what we should be working on and investing in. So now I'm going to take the models down to the next level, which is how do we actually understand the projects that we are working on. So if you recall what we had a moment ago, was an architecture, and we had stakeholders. And I put a little dotted line around this just to illustrate that when we pick one of these processes to work on, for example, deliver pizza order, not all of the stakeholders are involved. But for deliver the pizza order, I have my suppliers have to provide all the raw materials, the ingredients, and so on, and my delivery customers who receive it. So if we have it at the architectural level, it makes it much, much easier to take on each process one at a time. And we've already had the battles about what's important to the outside world, and we can get going with much more haste and a much more reliability that what we're doing is going to be connected to why we picked that process in the first place. Again, coming back to the IGOEs again, we would basically look at an IGOE chart for the overall process. We would examine how well are the materials, the information, and the current states of what's coming into it, what's the quality and the timeliness and all the other KPIs we talked about of our finished goods, if it's physical, or our updated information, if it's informational, or if it's just a state like the state of a customer or the state of an order. How well is that transformation actually working? So this inputs to outputs is key. But also, as we said before, the guides. The guides are critical. Our business rules show up as guides. Our business rules are not embedded inside the process. Our business rules are actually guides, and that those business rules may be used by more than one process. So therefore, we need to have them separated. So if we change one, then we know every place from a business process point of view that actually may be impacted by making that change. And the same thing may be true in some of our capabilities, our people, our facilities, our technologies. Now, as we said before, the what we have here is a source, and the source will be the rule that's in the manifesto. The rule is, if you're coming into a business process, anything coming in can only come from an external stakeholder or an internal process in the architecture. We have very, very strict rules about, this shows up in our process models too, very strict rules that say you cannot send a piece of information to SAP. You cannot send it to Frank. You cannot send it to the accounts payable department. You send it to another process. That process might be executed using SAP. Frank might work in that process, and the accounts payable department might be the prime people working or doing the work in that process. But we want processes connecting to processes or external stakeholders. That way we retain the integrity of our models. By the way, one of the things we've noticed is the business people relate exceptionally well to IGOE charts. Because it's words on a page and not boxes and arrows, for some reason it does not intimidate them. And they're in very short order. They're in there pitching in and up at the whiteboard with you, making all of this to happen. So for the pizza restaurant, even for this simple little pizza restaurant, a process called deliver pizza order, there's a lot of things coming in. We have requests for the order, we have customer information, we have payments, we have complaints, we have supplies, lots of things coming into the process, coming from the external stakeholder called customer, or another process, prepare food or purchase supplies. We also have lots of things going out. The order goes out to the customer. At some point in time, that order will go out to the customer. Or certain other information goes out to other processes to prepare food, to update finance, and so on. Same is true of the guides up here. Our policies, delivery menu, territories, credit policy, health and safety, all of this is basically coming from a set of other processes, develop strategy, and so on. And all of our enabling capabilities, our order system, our staff, and our delivery vehicles all come from other processes. So hopefully you can see we have complete integrity on the model even when we pick a piece of it out. And I mentioned before, you'd see the traffic lights again, and we see it at this level. What this starts to show us is that if I have a green coming in and a red coming out, then I have to look inside here to find the cause of issues. if I have reds coming in, maybe I need to look at a different process to solve the problem. So it's quite engaging to find out where the issues really are. And sometimes there's differences of opinion, and this diagram actually helps you pull all of these out. Now, what we can also use this for is to actually scope your project, your business process change project. So in this particular case here, I don't think I can really fix deliver pizza order if I don't look at prepare food, because there's reds hanging around prepare food. Also, if I don't look at acquire and maintain equipment, then I'm probably always going to have vehicles that break down, and I won't really be able to deliver the results. So other processes may be pulled into your project in order to deliver the performance improvement that, that you're aiming for. So once we have that nicely laid out as scope, and by the way, you learn a lot, even at one IGO level, you learn a lot about where your issues are and what you need to do about them. Let's look at how do we analyze it. So the IGOs are really quite good at the higher levels of the decomposition, the high-level processes. Once you get down to sort of tasks and steps and small pieces of work, then you'll find things like swim lane diagrams and BPMN core notation charts are quite helpful, because each activity fits in a nicely in a particular role. At the top level, all of these processes or activities at the top tend to span a number of swim lanes, so it's not particularly useful at the top, and IGOs are not particularly useful at the bottom. So this is an illustration of the principle in the manifesto that says you should have a notation which is appropriate for the people you're dealing with. However, you need to make sure there's complete traceability on all the naming used and all the models from top to bottom and bottom to top. So use the right tools for the right situation. So now this is not intended to scare everybody, but it does get people's attention. What this shows is that you can start to put your, and I'm not going to go through all the details, you can put your IGOs together into a bit of a flow. The difference between this and the BPMN diagram is this flow really completely shows you the data flow, whereas a BPMN diagram is more of a dependency and it's a workflow. You need both. There's a myth right now that BPMN will solve all of your problems. It will not. It's not clear to see the data. You can't trace from problems at the end to the beginning. I highly recommend you have both of these. Information is critical in our business processes, just as flow is critical. You need both. This looks quite technical, but I would certainly not show this to an executive or a senior business person, but I would, as an analyst, try to make sure I was able to trace every piece of information that's moving back and forth between the sub-activities in this particular process. So now, you can then, of course, as I just mentioned, use some swim lanes or BPMN core notation. You don't need all the details of all the notational variances at the implementation level for BPMN. If we now come back and try to find the traceability on the measurement side of this, we'll also start to see that that as we go down the stack of the business process, from deliver the order all the way down to take the order to take the request, those levels are also measurable, and you can contribute the measurement up to the overall value you're trying to create for the stakeholder, the customer of the deliver pizza order. And if we look at the bottom part of this, you'll start to see that you can actually start to see that your M1 measure, which is your customer measure, can be contributed towards by the M2 measures, which are the big activities, deliver, order, prepare food. But if we look inside take order as an illustration, we even have measures of the steps inside it. I can measure each one of those as well, with the idea being that the M3 measures contribute to the M2s, contribute to the M1s. And I've built, as I've been building my process hierarchy, I am also building my measurement system and my scorecard system, which is in terms of results of work that's performed, and not only based upon the org chart. This way we have complete traceability of measurement to value that's created to the outside world. Again, remember, that customer doesn't care about your org chart whatsoever. They care about the value they get and the pizza they receive in this particular example. But if I spot my M3s, I can actually find if I have a problem with the measures on the M3, that means I'm going to have a problem at the M2, which means I'm definitely going to have a problem at the M1. I can start to find leading indicators and not just find lagging measures after the fact. So, and getting closer to the end right now, now we're going to talk about the redesign of that process. One of the things, this is just an illustration of a set of process scenarios. Again, we don't need to look at all the details, but I'll pick one out. In this particular case here, I have a variety of conditions, such as I receive an order, I receive an order, and it's from a new customer, line 7. The condition, the type of order, it's a new order automatically, but it could have been the same as before if it was an existing customer. And in this case, they're going to pay by credit card, and that right now that's happening about 18% of the time. So what this does, looking at each scenario, allows me to test my business process with all the varying conditions that could take place. And this is also a really good basis for developing your system tests, your training guides, your procedure manuals, and even it can be a really good start for having some of the scenarios for your use cases if you're going all the way down to requirements definition. But we do this based upon the models we just talked about, and that we can make sure we have some really good conditions defined, but earlier than what we typically do. We want to test the business process by walking through scenarios. And sometimes you can even act it out. I've seen organizations actually role play each of these scenarios out to see if they're going to work, and then update the models based upon them. Now, earlier I talked a little bit about complete business solutions. One of the talks that I'm going to make at the conference is a discussion about capabilities and why business processes are at the heart of capabilities for all of the business architects out there. And one of the reasons we say this is that the business process is really the only thing that can be measured and traced to the outcomes and value to the stakeholders. So the business process becomes the foundation for defining your capability map in a way that it is traceable and measurable, in a way where you can actually link the information and knowledge that comes in and goes out of those processes in the next ring. But also, in business process management, we really believe it's not just about workflow, it's not just about a box connecting to a box. It's about dealing with the issue. If the business policy is crazy and the rules really make no sense, then you need to change the rules while you're fixing the process. And that rule constraint might end up constraining the performance of the business process. It's the only thing that connects to strategy, and I talked about that. Business processes are executed in an organization where there's formal roles and responsibilities, when there's a formal incentive plan. And the question is the incentive plan for the people inside the organization, is it fighting the business performance that we're trying to achieve or not? Do we have the right physical facilities? In some industries, this is a big issue. In mining, oil and gas, this is critical because it's built-in information systems as well. The enabling technologies, of course, our information systems need to support this, but it's not the only thing on the hexagon. A capability is everything on this page working together, process-centric. And last but not least, of course, is our human resources. Are they competent? Do you have enough of them? Do they care? Are they motivated? Is their personal motivation in alignment with the business performance? So we will look at the solutions in terms of the hexagon, and we'll have quite a big discussion of this at the conference. So we're moving then from design down to requirements. We have a stack of models working all the way through from enterprise level down to implementation level. Quite often business process improvement initiatives will stop around the level 2, level 3, but we might need level 6, level 7. But you can keep going in order to do your specifications for your IT systems. You can build your use cases, or you can specify your BPMN detailed diagrams here to implement what you need to implement. But the stack stays connected, and it stays connected to value creation. So this is where we're going to end off for today. The business process associates all of the model requirements. It defines the activities, it defines the roles, it defines the events. A business process starts with a triggering event and ends with a closing event. And a closing event on one process is probably going to be a triggering event on another process. So we get all of our timings sorted out. It defines what information we need, because the business process basically can create information, it can update information, it can delete information, it can read or use information. A business process can be measured. We can set the KPIs, and we can define the performance requirements in terms of measurements. It basically helps you define the business rules, or at the very least associate the right rules with the right activities. And it's the basis for defining IT services, because certain aspects of this will be done by people, some will be done by information technology services. So what this really means is that you kind of predicted exactly the path the process instance may take, but you've got all the raw materials, all the tools you need in order to sort all of that out. So that's the end of the formal presentation. I will be very, very happy to basically take any questions you might have. I'll turn it back over to Shane.
Thanks, Roger. Few questions for you, please. First one is, where can I get a copy of the Business Process Manifesto?
Okay. Business Process Manifesto is available. If you go to BPTrends, let me just say a little bit about BPTrends. BPTrends.com is the largest knowledge portal for business process in the world. It has articles by well-renowned authors every month, and you won't be spammed to death. If you go to BPTrends.com, you'll see on the right-hand side a link to the manifesto, and you'll see over there the availability of the English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Lithuanian, Russian, and I'm missing someone. And there's another version out there, Italian version as well. It's all available out there, and there's a few other languages. German is coming soon too. But you can go there and you can just download that as a free download.
Thanks, Roger. And a question about the IGO charts. So is this a new notation or concept that you're personally recommending?
Yes, I mean, if you go back long enough, which I'm actually able to do since I started working in the business process space in 1991. I taught the first class in the world ever on business process management that we can find. And I'm happy to say we actually taught one of those for the predecessor of IRM, even in 1994. But if you go back far enough, you will actually find a notation that was called IDEF0, IDEF0. And in IDEF0, that particular notation, which is very popular in the U.S. military, that particular notation had things called inputs, outputs, but it had controls and mechanisms. So I called them icons. But what we found is that was a particularly good notation with boxes and arrows to connect them together for manufacturing, but not so much for business. So we sort of took the essence of that and changed that in the early 90s to guides and enablers as opposed to controls and mechanisms. And what we also did at the same time is, rather than having boxes and arrows, we put shapes on the wall and allow people to put Post-it notes up to be able to articulate what they're doing and thereby engaging business people in the discussion. We recommend it very, very strongly because other notations do not show you where the business rules fit, for example, the guides. They do not show you how the particular resources play well. And some are better at some aspects, but no one sort of captures all of it together well. And what it becomes more of a business notation rather than an IT flow or BPMS navigational notation. So if you look around the world now, a lot of people are using this. It's become a standard in a lot of organizations. And I get notes all the time from people saying, thank you for the IGO. It's saved my life in this analysis that I've been doing.
Thanks, Roger. And we've one question that I think I can answer, and that is the recording of the webinar available? Yes, it will be, and it will be emailed to all the attendees of the webinar, and we'll also make it available on the BPM conference website.
Right.
Right. Speaking of the conference, I have one question about the conference for you, Roger, and it's what are the don't miss highlights of the BPM Conference Europe next month?
Well, what would the highlights be?
Yes,
well,
highlights. Yes.
I could be very confident in myself and say you have to come to my talks, but of course I'm the chair. I would say that, but I think that there will be. I think the highlights are the breadth that it covers. We are talking about a number of innovative approaches. I think one of the real highlights of the conference is the level of experience of the people who are presenting at the conference. Having handpicked, along with some other associates, the speakers for the event, I'm really, really happy to say that this year that we have two types of speakers. We have people who work in organizations who have been applying these ideas with real case studies, with real dirt underneath their fingernails, who can and who will talk about the successes they've had, but also the challenges that they've faced and how they got around those challenges. So it's a very real conference. And in addition to that, we also have the top thought leaders in the world. We have people like Paul Harmon, who's the executive editor of BPTrends, very highly respected individual. He's going to be talking about where the trends go. We're going to have people like Sandy Kemsley, who is a real leader on the technology side of all of it, to really talk about how does the technology stack all work together. We have people such as Ron Ross, who is regarded as the leader in the business rule space, talking about how decisions require business processes and business rules to come together. I personally am doing a talk, as I talked about, on the capabilities side of it, but also we have a set of seminars, and one of which I'm going to do with a very knowledgeable associate, and we're going to talk about how does business architecture, how does it get done, not only from the hard side, but also the soft side. How do we introduce culture change and so on? So the change management shows up also throughout the conference and so on. And I think the one thing I'm quite proud of is that how we've actually been able to take enterprise architecture and business process management and connect them in a very, very key way. And the way we're connecting them is through business architecture. So our 2 tracks on business process management and our track on business architecture, along with of course, we have access to all the enterprise architecture sessions as well. So I chair about 4 or 5 conferences a year in various places around the world on a number of different continents, and I can truly say that this is always my favorite conference because it's there's a buzz, people collaborate, they connect, they discuss, and everybody learns a lot. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Good, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next month, Roger, and thanks very much for this webinar.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Roger.